Good morning. This is Jason Dean, Film Fanatic YouTube. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. Really, I've been really enjoying doing these videos, and especially this newer series where I've been covering the Halloween franchise since it's that time of year. Monday is Halloween, and it's Friday. It's hard to believe already that it's Halloween, and it's creeping up so darn fast. Halloween's always been my favorite holiday, and I've said before, we live in a this crazy consumer-driven society. So Halloween, Christmas, Thanksgiving, the holidays, all those things, like it's really about the buck for for say the corporate in the corporate world. So, you tend to see every year, it seems like things for Christmas, Halloween, and whatnot. Every year, it seems like you see uh, marketing things happening earlier and earlier. Like in August, you'll start seeing. I've seen things in August where they'll put out little hints that Halloween is coming, or they'll start selling Halloween candy. I remember seeing that. I think this year I was in Walgreens and I saw the first kind of indication. Oh wait, it's almost Halloween season, and I'm like, wow, it was like mid-August, and I remember walking through an aisle and I saw that they were starting to sell candy and selling things with like Halloween aesthetics tied to it, and I was just like, oh my god. And the same thing with Christmas. Christmas is insane that way, where they just push it. They push the advertisement for a lot of these holidays. It seems every year a little bit further and further away from this before the season starts to to make it into this big industry thing. And it's on one point, it's on one hand it's kind of like disgusting, but it's just kind of how the world is. But especially Christmas, and now that Halloween is now the second biggest holiday, it's like right behind Christmas as far as like the consumer aspect of it, and that's always been a thing. But it's interesting. I saw an interview with this guy who does movies, and he's a film critic, and he was talking about Halloween being his favorite holiday, and he said that it's because it's the one holiday where there's like no stress involved with it at all, and I thought that was really interesting because it's you're not there's no there's not anything tied to where that you're obligated to be at any kind of family gatherings. A lot of people unfortunately don't have great relationships with their families. So, and the pressure of, say around the holidays where you have to, contribute, you're like kind of forced to contribute to bringing something. And in Christmas with especially with Christmas, with the idea that you need to like buy as much stuff as you can to exchange gifts and all that kind of stuff and spend lots of money, and the stress of that, and that they try to create this thing where it's so consumer driven. But he was talking about how Halloween is it's just about fun. It's really, there's no like family obligations. You don't have to. There's no traveling. Like people have to travel, or at least they're conditioned that they need to travel everywhere for the holidays. Thanksgiving and Christmas. That they have to spend lots of money to show the spirit of the holidays, and they have to congregate a lot of the times with people that they don't necessarily get along with, and it causes lots of stress and for lots of people, and it's unfortunate, and anxiety. So he was talking about how Halloween, there isn't any travel involved. There's no requirements to do family gatherings. There's no requirements to have to spend money on goods or presents. You can dress up. You can just be dive into that magical aspect of Halloween and grab some makeup, costume, or a mask, or just hand out candy. If you want to have a party, you can just throw a party, or you can go to a friend's party. There's no like obligations as far as what the powers that be, as far as how they have shifted the holiday into this really consumer driven thing. And I thought that was really cool. Like it totally makes sense. But for me, Halloween has always been a thing. Like I've said before, like a lot of people, which I love, but go all out as far as decorating their houses and where they live, and towns really. I live close to like Belfast. It's a great little town city, and about 7 minutes away. I live close to Camden, and those areas are like really notorious for like really doing all kinds of decorations and really going all out for trick or treaters, which is super cool. I was talking to somebody, or actually talking to a little kid that I started working at the Montessori school in Belfast, and I was talking to a little kid about what he was going to do for Halloween. He's like, "Yeah, I'm going to go to I think it was Cedar Street in Belfast, because that place is like that area is notorious for, hundreds of kids going out trick or treating, and but the town itself actually has they actually raise money for that whole street to provide candy. So it's pretty amazing that it's all like led by the town. Um, and so that like the decorations, people, all the hotels, the motels that are on the mid coast, a lot of those places go all out and decorate, and a lot of houses, a lot of people, a lot of residents do the same thing. And it only comes once a year. But the thing I was talking about before was, for me, it's like my house is kind of decorated with the Halloween aesthetic year round. So when Halloween comes, I don't really put anything up, because my house is like naturally covered in that decor, as far as things that are tied to the Halloween season. Um, that's just kind of how I roll, and I've always loved that that appeal. And so that's that's a funny thing, because my house is decorated like that year round, so I don't really do anything different. It's always been an attraction for me. Um, so it's just kind of funny. I've had a couple of times it's happened where a few people have come to my house, and they've kind of freaked out a little bit, where they were like, "Wow, like your house is kind of spooky and scary." And um, one of my hobbies that I love to do is to I collect masks, and so I some of the masks that I have, I display them around the house. And I had one friend in particular. He said that he gets slightly freaked out when he comes to my house and he has to use my bathroom, which I thought was hilarious and funny. But again, it's just like, that's just kind of how I create my natural habitat, and that's just kind of how my house is decorated all year round. And most people do that only once a year, so it's pretty funny. But I've been enjoying doing this series. I've been trying to do a whole series on the Halloween franchise. I mentioned too on my last episode, I did a show on Halloween H2O, which I thought was uh, revisiting that movie. I hadn't seen that movie probably since it came out, and I remember like I was trying to recollect what my feelings were when I first saw it. And I thought it was pretty good, but I never really, I don't know, latched onto it to the degree that I did when I watched it again for this show in this series. And I was really blown away by how amazing of a film that is, and just it's now like easily one of my favorites. So far the list of films that I just really love in the franchise is obviously the first one, the masterpiece Halloween 1978 that came out. That was directed by John Carpenter, which is the legendary, iconic movie. And I'm a big fan of the second one, although it's not, doesn't have the quite the atmosphere as the first one, but I think it's really good, and it really holds up. And it's pretty good with following the storyline, because it's told from the perspective of the exact timeline of where the first one ends. It wasn't directed by John Carpenter, which I feel like has a you can tell, but it's still really good. Dean Cundey, I've talked a lot about. He's like my favorite cinematographer. He's done all of the work for John Carpenter. John Carpenter is one of my favorite horror film directors, and he's responsible for all of the all of his movies. But he's also responsible for doing lots of other films too, and he did the work for Halloween 2. And I just saw, trying to think, I just saw a movie the other night that Dean Cundey did the cinematography for. Actually, yeah, it was Psycho 2, which I really loved. And I'm going to eventually do a little series on the Psycho movies because I'm revisiting those. The first one being amazing, iconic movie, Alfred Hitchcock. But there's like three or four other ones that came out. And so I've been slowly watching those. And I just watched the second one. And I was really blown away by how awesome that movie is. So I think I'm going to do another series at some point where I'm going to do the Psycho films. But the second one was amazing. I was really blown away by it, and Dean Cundey was the cinematographer for that film, and but he's just so great. He's just amazing. I feel like everything he does is gold. He's just got this real minimalist approach to how he lights his shots, and the but he's just able to create such an amazing, magical kind of atmosphere where um, you know, you just you get lost in it, and it creates this atmosphere where you feel like you can touch it and taste it, and it's just so amazing. I recently just watched, which I'll do a show on eventually, John Carpenter's Escape from New York. That's one of my favorite films of his. I just love that movie with Kurt Russell. Just an amazing film. And I hadn't seen that in years. It's a super long time. And I watched that again recently. And, and Dean Cundey does the cinematography for that. And I know, I almost think that might be his, like, best work. Like, as great as Halloween and, like, say, The Fog, but as great as both of those films are, um, uh, I feel like Escape from New York is just next level because the scope of it, it's still like very raw and low budget, but the scale of it is amazing. Like there's a lot of giant like tracking shots in that film, and the lighting is amazing because it all takes place really at night and it's super dark. But you're able as the viewer to really be pulled into this universe, and it's really dark, but you're able to see everything that's happening. It's not never too dark. Like it's never an issue. Really amazing. One of the things I saw too recently, which I did a review on, was the new Hellraiser film, which is really good, and I was really impressed with that movie. The new one that just came out on, I think it's Hulu. Really original, and I was impressed with it. Obviously not as good as the original one by Clive Barker, but I still think it's really good. It's definitely better than any of the other ones in the franchise. But I was really, noticing the visual thing for Hellraiser, the new one, and I really liked it. But I watched a review where this one guy who I like a lot on YouTube, who does similar work that I do. He's got a lot more experience than I have, but he was commenting on how the film is very dark, like in a literal sense, and he felt like it's almost too dark because there's a lot of most about 95% of the film takes place in like a nighttime setting, and he was commenting on how there are lots of scenes where it's so dark that you can't really see kind of what's going on, and a lot of it has to do with the way it was shot for streaming. The resolution can be a little wonky that way. If it was shot for a theatrical release, I don't think that would have been much of a problem. But I remember watching when I watched Hellraiser that there were moments where I found myself really trying to see what was going on because it was the lighting was so dark, or the lighting itself was so minimal that it was actually hard to see what was going on at times. Um, but getting back to Dean Cundey, he is that guy who he can shoot a scene of where there's something happening in like a building where there's virtually no light, but maybe at all. But with his skill and his way of capturing movement and imagery, you can still see everything, and it's still um, totally easy to digest as to what's going on. It's really testimony to his amazing ability as a cinematographer, and he's like my favorite by far. And he's a super cool guy. I've seen lots of interviews with him, and he's a very modest, down to earth guy, but legendary, and he's still doing it. So he did Halloween 2, which I feel is really good. His cinematography, I think, really makes that movie great. Um, Even though it's not quite as good, and John Carpenter didn't direct it, his cinematography in the film is just amazing, and it really uh, keeps you in that realm of Halloween, and keeps you engaged in that whole kind of universe. And then the other movie I did a review on was Halloween 3, which for me is probably my favorite in the franchise. And that was a real breakaway kind of standalone film. And for me, it was like, it's definitely on my list of like top 10, horror kind of exploitation films, because it's so incredibly weird. It's very much a science fiction horror film. It's has virtually nothing to do with the whole Michael Myers mythology, but it's so utterly original, and it's a trip. It's kind of a bonkers movie. And Dean Cundey did the film work, the cinematography for that movie as well, and John Carpenter did the music for it. And I feel like, for my money, it's it's some of the best work he's ever done as far as a composer. And Dean Cundey's work on it is just amazing. And I did a show on that, and then I did a show. The last show I did was on H2O, which I was really impressed, and I really loved watching that again because it had been years since I'd seen it. Really great movie, real great kind of I guess you could consider it like a reboot, but really fresh. And the thing that I loved about that film was that it was Janet Jamie Lee Curtis is back in that film. They bring her back as playing an older person, and her mom Janet Leigh is in it also. And that film, I felt like, was like a really great kind of love letter to not only the Halloween franchise but to horror in general. And is a really great. I always love the certain films, not where they rip off films. I mean, that's you can see when if you watch a film or you like a director and you notice that he's like really influenced by other films, like as every artist would be. And you can see shades of like, oh, that's a little bit of a Kubrick thing, or that's a little bit of a, that scene reminds me of something from The Shining, or that definitely has a Hitchcock kind of vibe. Like I like that when you can kind of notice that, and then you have some filmmakers that more or less rip off, whole scenes from other movies, which can be a little bit of a thing that can kind of put you off a little bit toward to really enjoying the film, and they're not really necessarily making it or saying something different or blending it with their own style or voice. They're more or less just kind of ripping off scenes. That's a little bit of a different thing. Um, but with H2O, I felt like it was a really great kind of tip of the hat where it was definitely had a Hitchcock vibe, but it was a really fun movie. But there's a scene where Janet Leigh, who was in Psycho, she's in H2O, and there's a whole scene over where they pay tribute to Psycho and Bernard Herrmann, who did the music for Psycho, and it's amazing. It's this really short little sequence, and it's a total like tipping of the hat to like the films that came before the Halloween franchise and movies that particularly Psycho, that went on to influence, all the slasher films and horror films that came after Psycho, which, Psycho was a real, kind of juggernaut of a film that contributed a lot to the horror genre and the slasher genre. You know, just at like an epic scale, and it's a beautiful thing, and the way they did it was so awesome and impressive. The other thing I decided to do too is I'm not like I like a lot of the films I've watched. I pretty much have watched all of the films in the entire franchise, and I don't really tend to do shows on movies that I'm not really excited about. I don't do reviews on films I don't like. I don't usually do reviews. I try to only focus on doing reviews for movies or talk about movies that I generally that they where they just generally make me excited and I'm generally a real big fan of. And I try to, I try not to be a negative Nelly about too many films. Um, so, but I found myself, although I really like most of the films for the most part, I'm not really drawn to them. If like say part four, which came after Halloween three, and part five, and then there's part six, and then there's part seven. Like they're all good movies. I like them, but I'm not as excited about them, say, as like Halloween three or the first one or H2O. Like those movies generally, uh, you know, get me fired up, and I'm excited about them. The other films are like they're good, but I kind of forget about them afterwards, and I'm not like driven to watch them, per se. So I decided to focus on the films, and that being said, I like those films, and eventually it will probably change for me, but I generally try to just focus on the films that fire me up. So I decided to change what I was going to do with the series in this series of shows, and just focus on the films that I generally naturally really am excited about. So today's show is going to be on Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And that film, it's funny because when I first saw the first Rob Zombie movies, I mean his first when he because he did a reboot of Halloween and Halloween 2. I remember when those films came out, those films were huge. They were probably the biggest. Halloween 2, I believe, was one of the biggest in the franchise, outside of the Halloween and Halloween Kills, um, the more recent films. But Halloween 2 was the one of the biggest movies ever in the franchise, if not the biggest, as far as like its domestic box office success. But I remember seeing them when I first saw them. I really wasn't a fan. I didn't really like them. I thought one of the powers of the greatest power of the original is that it's about atmosphere, and I'm a big believer. Like I love slasher films. I love over the top violence. But to me, there's got to be some good characters. I have to kind of care about the people who are in the film. There has to be a pretty good story or a solid story, and but for me, it's got to be about like the atmosphere. It's got to be this cool universe of where I'm pulled into it, and and I like where there can be some kind of restraint. There can be. I'm a big believer in the concept of like less is more. A lot of the times when there is a little bit less of certain things, when you do have moments of where there is gratuitous violence, it's very exciting and it really does pull you in, as opposed to seeing everything on screen. And I like it when there's a little bit of restraint, and as a viewer, a lot of things are left up to your imagination. There's always a balance of that. So I thought, well, my first impression of the Rob Zombie films was that everything was being shown at you and coming at you on 11 the whole time. So it was, although it was totally different, and I did like that. It was underwhelming, and I wasn't really. It wasn't really about the atmosphere. It was about the violent kind of application of Michael Myers' kind of whole origin. And then years later, I saw them again, and I thought they were pretty good. They kind of grew on me. But the one that really grew on me that I really liked was Halloween 2. That one, I don't know, that film in particular, I felt like it was very very original. I love the it has a very almost psychedelic quality to it. The kills are amazing, but I feel like that movie has a really cool, rich, gritty atmosphere to it. So I've gone on to really love that film. And so today's show is about Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie. And I really, that's definitely my favorite. I prefer it more than the first one because I feel like the first one is still, I don't know, a little bit too much for showing everything, and it's a little bit too heavy-handed, and there isn't as much atmosphere. But the second one, it's very brutal and extremely violent, but I just feel like it creates this really cool. There is a real cool vibe to it, and it does have the psychedelic kind of quality, and it's pretty original. It breaks away from the normal kind of narrative of what we know or what we've seen in the franchise. And I thought that that part of it was really original, and you see different kind of sides and shades to the Michael Myers character. I don't own it, but eventually it's definitely on my list to get it. It was directed by, of course, Rob Zombie, and it came out in 2009. And really great, just an amazing roller coaster of a ride. The atmosphere is killer. And Rob Zombie, like overall, like I do love some of his films quite a bit. I think House of a Thousand Corpses is an amazing film. Um, I think that movie was a really kind of breakthrough film. You know, like most of the films, a lot of the times that I cover on this channel, I tend to really cover a lot of the horror exploitation grindhouse films, and and I feel like those films have a really huge impact and influence on Rob Zombie's work. And so House of a Thousand Corpses, I feel like has very much that late '60s '70s vibe to it, which I really love. It's really raw and gritty, and there's like scratches in the film, and it's just it goes to places you don't expect, but it's just got this really sick and twisted atmosphere to it. Huge fan of that movie. I have those on Blu-ray. Probably at some point I'll do a show on those on that film. Devil's Rejects is another one I really really love. I think that's a really great sequel. Again, it keeps up with that whole aesthetic that he created. Great atmosphere, great kills, good story, and super creepy, disturbing, great music, and again, a continuation of where he's like showing his influences, but doing something original with his own voice. And then the third one, which came out, I can't remember the name of it. I think it's three to Hell or Three Way to Hell, which was the third one in that trilogy. It's pretty good. I thought I liked it when I saw it, but I don't remember it being. I'd have to see it again, but I don't remember it being as strong. And it was pretty good, but not up to par with like the first two films, which I thought were just kind of like pure grindhouse cinema. And then Lords of Salem, which was another one he did. I didn't really like the film itself, like the story. I didn't understand. Like I felt like a lot of the acting and the storyline was, kind of convoluted. But the thing that I loved about that film, and it's something I want to revisit because it's been a while, was I remember visually the visual element for that film and the effects and the whole like vibe of that film was like uh, pretty amazing. Like there's the cinematography and the visual element of that film was like incredibly strong and really amazing and beautiful and really haunting. But I didn't feel like the story was necessarily there, and everything else was like not up to par. But the visual thing was amazing. But I do want to revisit that movie. I do want to see that again. Um, and then of course the Halloween films, and in particular, well, this show Halloween 2, which I think is one of his best films. I just think it's great. I eventually will get it on Blu-ray. I don't own it, unfortunately, but big fan of that film. And recently he did which I haven't seen, is he did a version of uh, live action version of the Munsters, which I've heard from most people or most sources is not very good. But I do want to see it. I was a huge fan of that show when I was a kid, of the original Munsters. So I'll eventually do a show on it. But very cool stuff with Halloween 2. I feel like he really did something unique and original. I like the films in the franchise that kind of dare to go places that gives you something totally new, or where they don't take it so seriously to where it gets too heavy and heavy-handed. You want that experience, but you want the atmosphere. You want it to be a good, like going through a haunted house, around Halloween time, where it's like thrills and chills. I'm a big fan of that, but then also when the filmmakers or people involved with the film will like throw a little bit of caution in the wind and do something totally different to keep the whole um, the whole story kind of moving into different directions. And I feel like what Rob Zombie did with Halloween 2 was that he took it into very different took the story and the whole mythology into very different avenues and explored different territory, and it's entertaining as hell, and it's a fun movie even though it's very grim and dark. It's not. It's also very entertaining, so it has a cool balance of that. I've said before that the last show which I'll be doing on this series will be for the last Halloween movie that just came out, which is called Halloween Ends, and I'm gonna do a show on that. And honestly, I'm not, like I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of the last three. Halloween, the one that came out in 2018, and then Halloween Kills, and then finally Halloween Ends, which just came out. Not a huge fan of that franchise, especially the first two. I think there are parts of those films that are really, interesting, a lot of cool ideas, but I feel like it's so serious. I don't. It feels like it's not. They're not really fun movies to be engaged with. They're really. I feel like they're too heavy-handed. There's too many characters. There's a lot of great ideas and there's some great things introduced, but I feel like they tried to make the story and the storyline and the narrative. They tried to make it too complicated. They tried to tie so many things in. Whereas, like, the original story and essence of Michael Myers is relatively simple and straightforward, and it's easy to understand. And you're getting the right, you're getting just the right amount of atmosphere and insight as to what the story is about. The newer ones are just very heavy-handed. They try to tie in a lot of social political things. They try to um, reintroduce all these characters that you haven't seen in like 40 years, and it's kind of messy and it's kind of hard to watch. And they're just very, very serious. And a lot of the times, it doesn't feel like you're in the Halloween atmosphere. But surprisingly, with the third one that just came out, um, there's some things about it I was really surprised with, and they took some real big chances with that film. I was really impressed as far as that goes. There are things about it that were not really probably that were not very well executed, I think, but it's definitely the best one I think out of the three, by far. And I think it's interesting because I remember, and I'm going to do a show on it, but one of the interesting things, uh, and I think it has a lot to do with the culture that we live in, but like I notice one of the weird things about social media is the whole kind of herd mentality, and in general, that's how we are as a culture. People like, I think a lot of the time people can't really not think of making or a decision, or if they're going to react to something, they kind of do it either as part of this camp that's over here or this camp that's over here. And it's like this group or pact kind of mentality, as opposed to like making a decision or making a comment or talking about things of where you're doing it as an individual. You're not doing it because more or less, well, okay, all these people are jumping on this bandwagon, and then on this side you have all these people that are jumping on this other bandwagon. So I'm gonna, maybe feel obligated or something that, well, my friends are saying it, so they're kind of right, I guess. So I'm gonna go along with that, and I'm gonna comment on this section, as opposed to like not thinking of the group mentality and just making your own decision. I feel like our culture is more that way now than ever. I mean, like, case in point, I feel like, the way I never talk about politics on this station or on this show, but I feel like, you know, politics, um, I really subscribe to the South Park view, Trey Parker and Matt Stone's view of politics, where, it's either douchebag or shit sandwich, meaning the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. The whole stereotype thing of like the lesser of the evil, and it's all like kind of the Wizard of it's put it's all like a modern day version of like the Wizard of Oz, um, and um, and I feel like they're essentially these parties are like cults, and people can't really break away from these things. One might be to a degree a little bit more, quote unquote evil, or they would be labeled as evil. Evil is, evil is very subjective, but it's generally like, evil is lived backwards, but it is something that generally you're afraid of, or you have to use this label to justify your beliefs or something or whatnot. But I feel like both of them act as cults, and you people can't really break away. The majority of people can't really break away from that concept and try to make their own decision. They're always making these decisions in the guise or in the confines of a group, or and it's instead of questioning everything. And I feel like that's what's happened now more with social media. And I notice that with films where, you know, there's two groups, like with, for instance, like the newer the last Halloween Ends that came out. And I know, like, there's films that come out that are, awful and terrible, but there's great films that come out now, and that's always been a thing. And that's, and you can have really strong opinions about it, which is great. I feel like you should be fired up and excited about things, whether it's negative or positive, because you're engaged. But it feels like what I've noticed is, like, on one extreme you have people who like completely, trash this film beyond belief. And I notice, like, once somebody starts it, and it's usually like a group on Facebook of people who already kind of interact, and they're kind of like the cool kids, or the cool group. But it becomes this thing of, once that person says it, then it, like, the next other, and then other thousands of other people chiming in, and they all have the same opinion. But it becomes to the point of where it's like kind of absurd and kind of ridiculous, where it feels like, um I almost feel like they're just, it becomes this herd mentality. They're not really being objective and making their own decision, because, everybody and their grandmother is now taking a big shit on this movie or this book that came out that they don't like. So it's not really about whether or not they really like the film, or the reasons not liking it. It's because, well, everybody around me is saying it, so I gotta fit in. I gotta play that part. I can't I can't make my own decision. Or if I don't like a film, I don't necessarily have to be rude and be bullyish about it. There's plenty of films I don't like, and I try to be respectful of them, even if I don't like them. But I notice when this happens, you have people who are just like, they come across as just, you know, as like just awful and kind of toxic. It's not really about whether they like something or not. And then you have, on the other camp, you have people who become, because of this negativity around it and these negative reviews, and people just totally crapping all over something. Then you have other people that swing way to the other side, saying, well, no, this is the greatest film ever, and this is blah blah blah, and how dare you, how dare you, crap on this movie, and it's such a masterpiece, and where they're the other extreme of the camp, and it's the same thing of people who are totally, I feel like they're sheep and they can't just make their own decision, and there's got to be somebody in the middle that can just make a decision or a statement without thinking about these two herds going on, of these two polar opposites, and just make a decision and be sensible. Try to be sensible about it, and but kind of be respectful. Don't come across as this like aggravated, pissed off bully, And it's funny because and I feel like that's kind of how things are now. That's the downside, I think, of social media is that people, you see that, and it's part of our culture. It's part of our, how we are as a species, but even more so now. But I noticed that with the last Halloween movie, big time, and I've noticed that more and more with certain other films. One other example of that was with the Hellraiser movie, which, the newer one, which I really, really like, and I think it's great. But I noticed that's gotten a lot of great reviews. But I noticed the same thing even with that. Most people started chiming in various groups on social media, mostly Facebook. But then it becomes a thing of where everybody is like jumping on this wagon of saying all these positive things. But it's all like this, suddenly everybody's a critic and everybody's got to like say what something is and try to um I don't, and I think initially it's something that, yeah, you want to express yourself and put your opinion out there, which is normal, I guess, and which is, pretty healthy for the most part. But I think it comes to a point of where it's not really that. It's about this social stature or status of fitting in. So you see everybody else doing it, so you need to do that because that makes you important or gives you a connection to this group of people, as opposed to like, well, no, I thought that was really good. I didn't really enjoy that, and just making that a thing. So it's weird. It's super weird. It happens more and more now with social media. But I feel like, for good or bad, but there isn't a balance. There isn't. It's not really about giving your opinion and being objective about it. It's about, it escalates always to the point of where I feel it's like, it's like a congregation at church, or it's like a Democratic or a Republican political rally. It's no, it's not about the individual. It's about the collective. So, but anyway, this is Jason D, and I will end the show there. If you get a chance, definitely uh, go out and see Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. I really, really love that film. It's grown on me more and more over the years, and eventually I want to get it on Blu-ray. I don't have it right now, but so yeah, stay tuned for my next show. I'll be doing a show on Halloween Ends very soon. All right, take it easy, and if you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. Take it easy. Peace.